Moving into the mansion wasn't as thrilling as I'd expected. My mom remarried and suddenly I had a stepbrother, Ryan. The guy's a walking cliché, tall, confident, and annoyingly attractive. The first time I met him, he flashed this perfect smile, and I felt something I shouldn't have. "Hey, Steven," Ryan's voice was smooth, casual, as if we'd known each other for years. He extended a hand. "Guess we're brothers now." "Yeah, I guess so," I muttered, shaking his hand. It was warm, strong, and I hated how aware I was of that. He didn't miss a beat. "So, what do you think of the place?" I glanced around, taking in the grand staircase, the expensive art on the walls. It was a far cry from our old, modest home. "It's different." Ryan chuckled, a low, rich sound. "You'll get used to it. If you need anything, just ask. I'll show you around, help you settle in." "Thanks," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. But as he led me down the hallway, pointing out rooms with an easy charm, I couldn't shake the strange tension between us. As we reached the end of the tour, Ryan stopped in front of a door. "This is your room," he said, leaning against the frame. "You'll like it. It's got a great view." "Thanks," I said again, feeling like a broken record. Ryan tilted his head, his eyes locking onto mine. "Relax, Steven. We're family now. It's going to be fine." Family. The word hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. I nodded, more to myself than to him, and stepped into my new room, closing the door behind me. I leaned against the door, trying to shake off the weird feeling. This was just a new start, that's all. But as I unpacked my things, I couldn't help but think about Ryan, about the way his smile made my stomach flip, about the way he made me feel. Things I wasn't supposed to feel. This was going to be more complicated than I thought. Ryan and I settled into a routine quickly, but it didn't feel normal, not by a long shot. Every day we danced around this unspoken thing between us. I'd catch him watching me out of the corner of my eye, and every time our eyes met, it was like we were sharing a secret neither of us wanted to admit. One night after dinner, Ryan plopped down on the couch next to me. Too close. "You into this show?" he asked, nodding at the TV. I shrugged. "Not really, just something to pass the time." Mind if I joined? He didn't wait for an answer, just made himself comfortable, his leg brushing against mine. I tried to focus on the screen, but all I could think about was how close he was. The heat from his body, the way his arm casually rested on the back of the couch, nearly touching my shoulders. I shifted, trying to create some space, but he just grinned and leaned in a little closer. "You're jumpy," he observed, not looking at me, but I could hear the amusement in his voice. "Just tired, I guess," I replied, forcing a laugh that sounded fake even to my own ears. Ryan's smile didn't falter. "You know, you don't have to be so tense around me. I'm not that bad, am I?" "It's not that," I said quickly, too quickly. "It's just this whole situation. It's new, that's all." He nodded, finally taking his eyes off the TV to look at me. "Yeah, I get it. New family, new house. It's a lot. But we'll figure it out. Together." There was that word again. Family. It felt wrong, twisted somehow when he said it. I nodded, trying to seem casual, but the way he was looking at me, like he could see straight through my act, was making my skin prickle. Ryan reached over, his hand landing on my knee, giving it a light squeeze. "Relax, Steven. I'm here if you need anything, remember." I swallowed hard, nodding again. "Yeah, thanks." The weight of his hand stayed there for a moment longer than necessary before he finally pulled it away. I didn't move, didn't breathe until he did. He stood up, stretching lazily. "I'm heading to bed. You should get some rest too. Big day tomorrow." "Yeah, sure," I mumbled, watching him walk away, his easy confidence lingering in the air like a fog I couldn't escape. As soon as he was out of sight, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. This was bad, really bad. I couldn't get him out of my head, couldn't stop thinking about that touch, that look. The problem was, I didn't want to stop thinking about it. The tension between us kept building, like a pressure cooker about to explode. We fell into this weird pattern, awkward small talk, accidental touches, those lingering looks that made my heart race. I told myself it was just a phase, something that would pass once we got used to living together. But deep down, I knew better. One Friday night, after another long week of pretending everything was normal, Ryan suggested we head up to his penthouse for some wine. I agreed, partly because I didn't want to seem weird, and partly because I was curious about him, about us. His penthouse was a different world, sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. The lights twinkled below us like stars, making everything feel surreal, like we were floating above reality. Ryan poured us both a glass of wine, handing me mine with that easy smile of his. To surviving another week, he toasted, clinking his glass against mine. "Cheers," I replied, taking a sip, the warmth of the wine spreading through me, relaxing my nerves just a little. We sat down on the plush couch, the city skyline stretching out before us. For a while, we just talked about nothing in particular. College, life, our parents. It felt normal, almost. But there was an undercurrent, something unspoken hanging in the air between us, pulling us closer with every passing minute. After a while, Ryan set his glass down and turned to face me, his expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "You've been quiet tonight. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Just everything, I guess. It's been a lot. "Yeah, I get that." He leaned in a little, his gaze locked onto mine. You can talk to me about anything, right?" "Yeah, I know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan's hand found its way to my knee again, that familiar squeeze sending a jolt through me. But this time, he didn't pull away. Instead, he moved closer, his eyes searching mine, like he was looking for something, permission, maybe, or courage. Before I could think, before I could stop myself, I leaned in, closing the distance between us. His lips met mine, tentative at first, testing the waters. But then, as if a dam had broken, the kiss deepened, grew more urgent. His hand slid up to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I found myself lost in the moment, in him. The world outside disappeared, leaving just the two of us, locked in this kiss that felt like it had been a long time coming. It was everything I hadn't let myself imagine, intense, electric and wrong in all the right ways. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless. Ryan's eyes were wide, searching mine for any sign of regret. But all I felt was the rush of adrenaline, the undeniable pull between us. "Steven," he started, his voice shaky, uncertain. But I didn't let him finish. I pressed my lips to his again, needing to feel that connection, that spark. Whatever this was, whatever was happening between us, it wasn't going away. And in that moment, I didn't want it to. After that kiss, things escalated faster than I could have imagined. The line we'd been tiptoeing around for weeks had been crossed, and there was no going back. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. Ryan pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes, his breath warm against my lips. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. Instead of answering, I kissed him again, harder this time, letting my actions speak for me. Ryan responded immediately, his hands sliding down my back, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. Before I knew it, Ryan had swept me off the couch and into his arms. It was like something out of a movie, the way he carried me, strong and determined, as if he'd made up his mind too. I wrapped my arms around his neck, holding on tight as he carried me toward his bedroom. The moment we crossed the threshold, the atmosphere changed, heavier, more intense. Ryan set me down gently on the bed, his eyes never leaving mine as he leaned in, his lips capturing mine in another searing kiss. This time there was no hesitation, no second guessing. Just the two of us, lost in the heat of the moment. Clothes were discarded in a blur of motion, and soon we were wrapped up in each other, the outside world fading away entirely. Every touch, every kiss, was electric, charged with the intensity of something we both knew was forbidden but couldn't resist. It was like we were trying to make up for all the time we'd spent avoiding this, all the tension that had built up over the weeks, finally finding its release. As the night went on, everything else disappeared, our parents, the awkwardness, the guilt. All that mattered was this connection, this undeniable pull that had drawn us together from the start. When it was over, we lay tangled in the sheets, our breathing heavy, the room filled with the soft glow of the city lights outside. Ryan's arm was draped over me, his chest rising and falling steadily as he started to drift off to sleep. But I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, replaying everything that had just happened. I knew this was going to change everything. We couldn't just pretend this was a one-time thing, couldn't just go back to how things were. Not after this. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, Ryan stirred beside me, his hand finding mine in the dark. "You okay?" he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "Yeah," I replied, though I wasn't sure if that was true. Just thinking. Ryan squeezed my hand gently. "We'll figure it out," he said, his words a promise, but there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice that matched the knot in my stomach. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, and closed my eyes, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts swirling in my head. Whatever happened next, there was no denying that this night had changed everything. But as I finally started to drift off, one thought kept circling back: how do we go back from this? The answer, I knew deep down, was that we couldn't. When I woke up the next morning, the room was bathed in soft, early light. For a moment I didn't move, didn't open my eyes fully, trying to hold on to the comfort of the warmth next to me. But reality crashed down quickly as I felt Ryan stir beside me. I opened my eyes, taking in the sight of him, his hair tousled, his face peaceful, and the sheets barely covering him. My clothes were scattered across the floor, a messy reminder of the night before. Panic started to bubble up inside me, but I pushed it down, trying to think clearly. Ryan blinked awake, turning his head to look at me. There was a moment of silence, where neither of us moved, like we were both waiting for the other to say something, to make sense of the situation. "Morning," he finally said, his voice rough from sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. We both knew what had happened, and we both knew what it meant. The silence between us was heavy, full of unspoken questions and unvoiced fears. I couldn't avoid it any longer. I needed to say something, anything, to break the tension. "Ryan, we need to talk," I started, my heart pounding in my chest. He sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, we do," he sighed, looking at me with a mix of regret and something else I couldn't quite place. "Last night, we shouldn't have done that." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean." Stephen, his voice was firm, but there was a tremor beneath it. "We're brothers now in this. It can't happen again." The words hung in the air, cold and final. I knew he was right, but it didn't make it hurt any less. I nodded slowly, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. "Yeah, you're right." Ryan reached over, touching my arm gently. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make things complicated. I don't know what came over me." "It's not just you," I admitted, avoiding his gaze. I felt it too. "But we can't." He nodded, letting his hand drop away. "Yeah, we can't." For a moment we just sat there in silence, the weight of everything we weren't saying pressing down on us. Finally Ryan got up, pulling on his clothes in a hurry. I did the same, the awkwardness between us growing with each passing second. As we dressed, it hit me that we couldn't go back to how things were. Not after last night. But we had to pretend, had to find a way to act like nothing had changed. Ryan walked to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "We'll just keep this between us, okay?" "Okay," I agreed, though it felt like a lie. How could we keep something like this secret when it had changed everything? He gave me a small, sad smile before slipping out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sat back down on the bed, staring at the spot where he'd just been, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. We'd made a mistake, a big one. But the worst part was, I wasn't sure it was a mistake I wanted to undo, and that scared me more than anything. As I got up to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The days that followed were torture. Ryan and I tried to act like everything was normal, but it was like walking on a tightrope. One wrong move, and everything would come crashing down. The tension between us was thick, almost suffocating, but we both pretended it wasn't there. We had to. At breakfast the next morning I sat at the table, pushing my food around my plate. Ryan walked in, casual as ever, though I could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes avoided mine. He greeted my mom with a smile, but when he glanced at me, there was a flicker of something: regret, maybe? Guilt? I wasn't sure. "Morning, everyone," Ryan said, his voice a little too bright. "Morning," I mumbled, not trusting myself to say more. Our mom, blissfully unaware, was chatting away about her plans for the day, but I couldn't focus. All I could think about was the way Ryan's leg brushed against mine under the table, the way he stiffened slightly when it happened. It was a tiny, insignificant touch, but it set off a chain reaction in my mind, bringing back memories of that night in his penthouse. Ryan's phone buzzed on the table, and he grabbed it like it was a lifeline. "Sorry, I've got to take this," he said, standing up quickly. "I'll catch up with you later." As he walked out of the room, I could feel my mom's eyes on me. "Everything okay, Stephen? You seem a bit off." "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile, just tired. She didn't seem convinced, but she let it go, thankfully. I couldn't deal with more questions, not when I didn't have any answers myself. The rest of the day dragged on, every interaction with Ryan tinged with awkwardness. We tried to avoid being alone together, but it was impossible in a house this big. Every time we passed each other in the hallway, there was this charged silence, like we were both waiting for the other to say something, to acknowledge what had happened, but neither of us did. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, there was a soft knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat, knowing it was Ryan. I hesitated, but eventually I opened the door. Ryan stood there, looking as uneasy as I felt. "Hey," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was around. "Can we talk?" I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. He walked in, closing the door softly behind him. We stood there for a moment, the silence heavy between us. "Stephen," he started, his voice strained, "I know things have been weird, and I hate that. I don't know how to fix this." Me neither, I admitted, sinking down onto the edge of my bed. "It's like, I can't stop thinking about it. About you. But we agreed this can't happen again." "I know," he said, running a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "But it's not that easy, is it? I keep telling myself to move on, but then I see you and—" He trailed off, and I could see the struggle in his eyes. It mirrored my own. We were both stuck, unable to go back to how things were, but too scared to move forward. "Ryan, we have to try," I said, though the words felt hollow. "For everyone's sake." "Yeah," he agreed, though his tone was resigned. "For everyone's sake." He moved to leave, but before he reached the door, he paused, turning back to me. "This doesn't change how I feel about you, Stephen. But maybe we just need time." "Maybe," I echoed, not really believing it. He gave me a small nod, then slipped out of the room, leaving me alone once again. I stared at the closed door for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down on me. That was all we had now, but I wasn't sure it would be enough to fix what had been broken, or to keep us from breaking it even more. Time didn't fix anything. If anything, it made things worse. The more we tried to act like nothing had happened, the more aware I became of every little thing about Ryan. The way he laughed, the way he looked, the way he moved, the way he looked at me when he thought no one was watching. It was driving me insane. We kept our distance as best we could, but living under the same roof made that nearly impossible. Every time we were in the same room, the air felt charged, thick with everything we weren't saying. It was like we were stuck in this endless loop, trying to resist something that neither of us wanted to admit we couldn't. One night I was sitting in the living room, pretending to be interested in some random show on TV when Ryan walked in. He hesitated in the doorway, as if debating whether or not to come in, but eventually he crossed the room and sat down on the other end of the couch. Not too close, but close enough that I could feel his presence, like a magnet pulling me toward him. For a few minutes we sat there in silence, both staring at the TV, neither of us really watching it. The tension between us was suffocating, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I should get up, leave, put more distance between us, but I couldn't make myself move. Ryan was the first to break the silence. "This is stupid," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I glanced at him, my heart skipping a beat. "What is this? Us? Pretending like we can just forget everything." I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at him, my throat tight. Ryan turned to face me, his eyes intense, filled with the same frustration and longing that I'd been trying to bury. "Stephen, I can't do this anymore," he said, his voice low but firm. "I can't keep pretending that nothing's changed, because it has, and ignoring it isn't helping." I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I forced myself to respond. "What do you want me to say, Ryan? That I'm fine? That I don't think about it every second of every day? Because I do. But what choice do we have?" Ryan leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. We have a choice. We can either keep lying to ourselves and everyone else, or we can face this head on. But I need to know where you stand, Stephen. Because I can't keep doing this if I'm the only one who feels this way. The room seemed to close in around us, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. I wanted to tell him that I felt the same, that I was just as torn up inside as he was. But the fear of what that would mean, of what would happen if we gave in, held me back. I don't know, I finally whispered, my voice shaky. I want to pretend like it didn't happen, like we can just go back. But I know we can't, and that scares me. Ryan's expression softened and he moved closer, his hand reaching out to touch mine. It scares me too, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But I'd rather be scared and honest with you than keep living this lie. His hand was warm against mine, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in weeks. I squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement that I understood, that I was just as lost in this as he was. For a moment we just sat there holding onto each other, the TV droning on in the background, forgotten. The connection between us was undeniable, and the more I tried to fight it, the more futile it felt. Ryan leaned in slightly, his voice soft but firm. We don't have to decide anything right now. But let's stop pretending, okay? Let's stop lying to ourselves. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. And for now, that was all I could handle. As Ryan squeezed my hand one last time before letting go, I realized that no matter how hard we tried, there was no going back. We were already too far gone. The days after our conversation were different. Not easier, exactly, but there was a shift, a silent agreement to stop pretending. We didn't talk about what it meant or what we were going to do, but the tension between us felt less like a burden and more like a challenge, something we were both trying to navigate without tripping over our own feet. One night I was sitting at my desk struggling with some college work. The numbers on the page blurred together, a frustrating mess I couldn't untangle. I rubbed my eyes trying to push through, but the frustration was building fast. A soft knock on my door pulled me out of my thoughts. "Come in," I called, already knowing who it was. Ryan stepped in, closing the door behind him. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the doorframe, watching me. I tried to focus on my work, but his presence was distracting, a constant reminder of everything we were trying to figure out. "Mom said you were having trouble with your homework," he finally said, breaking the silence. "Yeah," I muttered, tapping my pen against the desk. Just can't seem to get my head around it. Ryan walked over, pulling up a chair next to me. "Let me take a look." He leaned in close, his arm brushing against mine as he scanned the page. I could feel the warmth of his body, the scent of his cologne, and it was enough to make my heart race. I told myself to focus, to pay attention to the numbers, but all I could think about was how close he was, how easy it would be to turn my head and kiss him. "This part's tricky," he said, pointing to a section on the page, "but if you break it down like this." He explained the problem, his voice calm and steady, and for a moment it was almost like things were normal. Almost. As he finished, he looked up at me, our faces inches apart. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. His eyes held mine, and I could see the same tension there, the same uncertainty. We were so close, closer than we'd allowed ourselves to be since that night. "Thanks," I said, my voice a little too quiet. "No problem," Ryan replied, but he didn't move away. Instead, he stayed where he was, his eyes flicking down to my lips for just a second before meeting mine again. The tension was unbearable, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in, closing the gap between us. My lips brushed his, tentative at first, but then he responded, kissing me back with a hunger that matched my own. It was like all the frustration, all the confusion we'd been feeling poured into that kiss, raw and unfiltered. This time there was no hesitation, no second guessing. Ryan's hand cupped the back of my neck, pulling me closer, and I let myself get lost in the moment, in him. The kiss deepened, and all the walls we'd built up crumbled away. When we finally broke apart, breathless, Ryan didn't pull back. He stayed close, his forehead resting against mine, his breath mingling with mine in the small space between us. "Stephen," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't want to keep fighting this. I can't." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Me neither." "Then let's stop," he whispered, his fingers tracing patterns on the back of my neck. Let's stop pretending we don't want this. I couldn't find the words to respond, so I kissed him again, letting my actions speak for me. This was our chance, our moment to finally be honest with each other, to stop running from what we both knew was inevitable. As we pulled each other closer, everything else faded away. It didn't matter that this was complicated, that we didn't have all the answers. All that mattered was that we were done pretending, done lying to ourselves. And in that moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we could figure this out together. After that night, everything between us changed. We didn't talk about it in the daylight, didn't make any grand declarations or plans, but the way we looked at each other, the way we touched when no one else was around, said it all. We were together secretly, quietly, but together. We navigated our new reality with a mix of caution and excitement. There was something thrilling about sneaking around, about stealing moments when no one was looking. But there was also a weight to it, a constant reminder that what we were doing was risky, that we were balancing on the edge of something that could break us if we weren't careful. One afternoon, we were alone in the house, our parents out for the day. I was in the kitchen, grabbing a drink, when Ryan walked in. He didn't say a word, just closed the distance between us, his hand slipping around my waist, pulling me close. I looked up at him, the heat between us palpable. We shouldn't, not here. No one's home, he whispered, his lips brushing against my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. We're safe. Safe. The word felt almost laughable, but I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that we could have this, even if it was just in stolen moments like these. Ryan kissed me, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I melted into him, my hands finding their way to the back of his neck, pulling him closer. The world outside faded away, leaving just the two of us in this little bubble we'd created. We moved together almost instinctively, until my back was pressed against the kitchen counter, Ryan's body warm against mine. The kiss deepened, our breaths mingling as everything else disappeared. It was just us, the rest of the world be damned. But as much as I wanted to stay in that moment, reality was never far behind. We couldn't stay like this, couldn't keep pretending we were safe when we were anything but. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless, our foreheads resting together. "This is crazy," I murmured, my voice trembling slightly. "I know," Ryan replied, his thumb brushing gently over my cheek. "But I don't care." I looked into his eyes, seeing the same mix of fear and desire that I felt. What if someone finds out? Ryan sighed, his hand slipping down to hold mine. Then we deal with it. But until then, we have this. This was fragile. I knew that. We were walking a tightrope, and one wrong step could send everything crashing down. But for now, the risk felt worth it. We spent the rest of the afternoon together, talking, laughing, kissing when the fear slipped away long enough to let us. It felt almost normal, almost like we were just two people in a relationship, without all the complications hanging over us. But as the sun began to set, reality started to creep back in. We knew our parents would be home soon, knew we'd have to go back to pretending, to acting like we were just stepbrothers, nothing more. Before we parted ways, Ryan pulled me close one last time, his lips brushing against mine in a soft, lingering kiss. "We'll figure this out, Stephen," he said quietly, his voice filled with a determination that made my heart ache. "I promise." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and watched as he walked away, disappearing up the stairs. As I stood there alone in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that this secret, as thrilling as it was a ticking time bomb. Sooner or later, something would have to give. And when it did, everything we'd built, everything we were trying so hard to protect might just come crashing down. The secret didn't stay easy for long. The more time we spent sneaking around, the more I felt the pressure building. Every glance, every touch in the shadows was a reminder that we were living on borrowed time. And I knew, deep down, that something had to give. It happened one evening, completely out of the blue. We were sitting in the living room, our parents just a few feet away, chatting about their day. Ryan and I were on opposite ends of the couch, acting as distant as we could manage. But the tension was thick, a thread stretched too tight. I could feel Ryan's eyes on me, could sense his frustration, his restlessness. It had been days since we'd had any time alone, and the strain was beginning to show. I kept my eyes on the TV, trying to focus on anything other than the fact that I wanted to reach out, to touch him, to be close to him in a way that was impossible with our parents so near. Then, Out of nowhere, our mom turned to us with a smile. "You two have been spending a lot of time together lately. It's nice to see you getting along so well." The comment was innocent, light-hearted, but it felt like a grenade had been tossed into the room. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat, and I saw Ryan stiffen too, his jaw clenching. We exchanged a quick, panicked look, but before either of us could say anything, our dad chimed in. "Yeah, it's great. I was a little worried at first, but you guys seem to be handling this whole stepbrother thing better than I expected." It was too much. The walls we'd built around our secret started to crack, and I could feel everything we'd been hiding teetering on the edge of exposure. My hands started to shake, and I clenched them into fists, trying to keep it together. But Ryan, he couldn't. He stood up abruptly, the sudden movement drawing everyone's attention. "I need to go out for a bit," he said, his voice tight. Now our mom asked, surprised, "Dinner's almost ready." "I'm not hungry," Ryan replied, already heading for the door. "I just need some air." Without waiting for a response, he was gone, the door slamming behind him. The room fell into an awkward silence, and I could feel my parents' eyes on me, confused, concerned. "Is everything okay with Ryan?" my dad asked, frowning. "He's been acting a bit off lately." I don't know," I lied, standing up quickly. "I'll go check on him." I bolted out of the house, my heart pounding as I searched for Ryan. I found him outside, pacing on the edge of the driveway, his hands in his hair, clearly struggling to keep it together. "Ryan," I called softly, walking toward him. He stopped pacing and turned to me, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and despair. "We can't keep doing this, Stephen. I can't keep doing this." My stomach twisted with fear. "What do you mean?" "I mean this secret. It's killing me," he said, his voice raw. "I hate sneaking around. I hate lying to them, to ourselves. And I hate that every time we're in the same room, I have to pretend like I don't want you, like I don't." He trailed off, his words hanging in the air, unfinished but clear. I stepped closer, reaching out to touch his arm. "Ryan, I know it's hard. But what choice do we have, if they find out?" "They'll hate us," he finished for me, his voice breaking. "Or worse, they'll hate you. And I can't stand the thought of that." I swallowed hard, the fear I'd been pushing down for weeks rising to the surface. "So what do we do? End it? Go back to pretending nothing ever happened?" He shook his head, frustration evident on his face. "I don't want to end it. I can't end it. But we can't keep living like this either. We have to do something." The weight of his words settled over me, heavy and unavoidable. He was right. We couldn't keep this up, couldn't keep lying to everyone, including ourselves. But the thought of telling the truth, of facing the consequences, terrified me. "Ryan," I began, my voice trembling, I'm scared. I'm scared of what will happen if they find out, of what it will do to our family." He took my hand, squeezing it tightly. "I'm scared too. But I'd rather face that fear with you than keep hiding from it. We can't keep living like this, Stephen. We have to be honest, if not with them, then at least with ourselves." I looked into his eyes, saw the resolve there, and knew he was right. We were at a crossroads, and it was time to make a choice. Either we continued down this path of secrecy and lies, or we faced the truth, no matter how hard it was. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Okay, let's figure this out. Together." Ryan pulled me into his arms, holding me close, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm. It wasn't going to be easy, and it might tear everything apart, but at least we wouldn't be lying to ourselves anymore. As we stood there in the fading light, holding on to each other like a lifeline, I knew that whatever happened next, we would face it together. And somehow, that made the fear a little more bearable. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: we couldn't keep pretending. It was time to confront the truth, no matter what it cost us.